Welcome to the Trinity Forum, our first Trinity Forum of our program year, and I'm so excited to be joined by India Birdsong. India is the Chief Executive Officer and General Manager of the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority. She joined in 2019. She guides Ohio's largest transit system, directing over 2,300 employees, managing $292 million in annual funds to provide more than 35 million annual rides across 457 square miles. So it is a lot of real estate. She's committed to transparency and accountability, piloting the GC RTA fleet towards innovative solutions that increase ridership, improve service, and contribute to the economic development of Greater Cleveland. She has degrees from Temple University and her master's from University of Illinois at Chicago. She served the Chicago Transit Authority for almost 10 years, where she had a role in planning, instruction, operations, and senior management of the bus supervision and instruction. She then worked as Chief Operating Officer for Nashville WeGo Public Transit in 2016, where she was an instrumental supporter of the city's 25-year growth plan, and then joined in 2019 RTA. Right about the time I came to Trinity. You probably hadn't heard about that. You were busy chasing a massive transit organization. But we're so glad to have you, India. Welcome to Trinity Cathedral.
Thank you so much. That sounds like a lot.
It does sound like, whenever you read a bio, there's so much to it. And I was, one of the things I knew I wanted to just share with you, because I love talking about transit. Mm-hmm. And I got thinking about what are some of the places in the cities that I've lived,
yeah.
And perhaps you can share yours as well, that are just great transit cities in the United States. I think these sometimes, outside of the U.S., there's a different scale sometimes. Mm-hmm. But yeah. I mean, I've lived in New York City, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, actually really good college transit, New Haven. We went on a little vacation last week to Chicago, and as soon as I saw that you worked for CTA, I was like, this is one of our souvenirs.
I was part of the group that actually started that program.
I thought you might be, Jennifer, based on the timeline. Well, about two weeks ago, I'm sitting there trying to make sense, figuring out the system. It takes a minute, and then before you know it, all four of us had our Venture cards. I downloaded mine to the phone, and we went all over Chicago. So thank you for getting that going. We really appreciated it.
I'm glad you have it in your pocket. Well, good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here. Can you all hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. We're newbie. I'm newbie too, so we'll work through it. It's really great to be here. This is a beautiful just place of worship, so I appreciate starting the week off this way. I think it always starts on Sunday. That's an operational habit, so this is good.
That's right.
But just if you want me to kind of go into the locations, you asked about transit.
Well, what have been great cities where you've lived for transit?
So I've moved around a little bit. I'm originally from Chicago, so I'm a Midwest girl. It's nice to come home in that regard. I've lived over the East Coast, so I've lived in Philadelphia, Boston area, of course Chicago, Nashville, Cleveland. Did a little traveling, so I move around just a little bit, and it's nice to be able to call Cleveland home because I think, well, first the weather, it's not as bad as people say, right? I'm used to that and not scared of it. I think people were a little nervous when they heard I came from Tennessee, and I said, don't worry, I'm from Chicago, and then they kind of breathed a little bit better. So that's always good. But like you mentioned, New York City is amazing with transit, but that's a huge urban core, right? So you have the traffic that you're fighting against. You don't really have that here in Cleveland as much. So that's always, that's not good for transit professionals, right? So the more traffic you have, the easier my sell is for folks to be able to hop on the system, because you don't want to be paying high gas prices. You don't want to be white knuckling your steering wheel out of frustration in rush hour. So here it's a little different, but I will say it's good in Cleveland because we have the bones, if I can say that.
Yeah.
Because it was big during the Carnegie, I'm saying that correctly, I usually say Carnegie, the Carnegie era, Rockefeller and all of those fine gentlemen, because you have the foundation. So a lot of just the sheer fact that we have the only passenger rail in the state of Ohio is huge. But the fact that it's 40, 50, years old makes it a state of good repair project, and does it make it quite as exciting to the ear when you first hear about it, because we're talking about how to improve it and how to bring it back into functionality rather than saying, hey, we're going to build this great thing.
Right.
But in my mind, it's the same thing. So if we haven't fully taken advantage of it, it's new, right? And we have an opportunity to make it good. But New York is great. LA Metro is awesome. They have a lot of fun things going on there in California. I've lived in Philadelphia. I mentioned that. I'm a Temple girl going to school, right, for undergrad. And that, of course, I was on public transportation a lot. Chicago, of course. Boston, they have the T. It's a good system as well. Theirs is a little elderly in certain areas, such as ours. But a lot of those systems have just been around for a while. And those are the systems that we typically want to emulate,
right,
as we're becoming bigger and better.
Right.
The systems I will say that I have been a part of that are smaller, like Tennessee, for example. People couldn't understand why I was leaving Chicago to go to Nashville. Nashville is not known for their public transportation, but they are known now for healthcare is coming there in a major way.
Right.
Technology, of course, you've got your singer-songwriters. The musical component has always been, a mainstay of that community. However, getting around and mobility has always been a little bit of a challenge. I am a planner by trade. I'm an urban planner with community development background. And so that was just like a planner's playground, I think,
right,
because it's being built. So if you build it, they will come. That kind of idea was important. And so we actually went through, I still say we, it's been a little while. You'll hear me say that with Chicago, too, everywhere I go. I kind of try to own it. But Nashville went through a transit referendum as well.
Okay.
And so I know that could be something you're going to ask me about today. If it's not, that's fine, too. But that's
I'd like to ask you about
the
transit referendum that may be coming up, since it's come up.
That's something I heard about when I first got here. Not so much in recent years. I would say that my response was, typically you go to the ballot on average 2 to 3 times before you get a yes. So Nashville's, for example, was the first time.
Okay.
A lot of it depends on the pulse of the city. So what's going on politically, what's going on in the mayor's office, what's going on with council, funding. The way that I look at it is that it's a race to who's more important for that ballot. Right. So if we were to go in Cleveland, transit will be up against education, probably fire, EMS, all of those things that are absolutely essential. Right. And we've got to create, I think, the buy-in and make the transit system first worthy of getting more money. We amazingly have gotten an amazing amount of money through the CARES Act, through the IIJA, all of these acronyms through the pandemic. And public transit has been alleviated, somehow the burden a little bit. It's still expensive. We still have a long ways to go, but we're not in the red anymore. We're in the black, which is a huge deal. So right now, I think what we need to do as a city and as a transit agency is put our money back into the investment and make the product better. I would not be personally comfortable rallying for a referendum or a transit tax increase unless I know the product that I'm pushing, so to speak, is top notch. So we'll get there. We're almost there. We probably need a few more years. And then we can come to the public with something that I think everybody will enjoy, a product that's a little safer, a product that's a little bit more frequent, and not be pushing 40-year rail cars down your throats. I need to make sure that it's a new system, newer system, that's got more of the technology involved so that it can stack up against the education and fire and all those things that we know we need.
Well, you talked about this Cleveland having really good bones for transit. And in many ways, Cleveland has great bones because of that era that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the cathedral that we're sitting in is very much an artifact of that time period. Yeah. Going back to when this was the wealthiest street in America because of who lived here, we have this space that speaks of not only who was there, but also the sense of civic responsibility, the sense of it's 2 hours into Sunday morning and my brain cells are not quite working
Probably
so
just
well.
Participation.
Right,
right?
people,
Yeah.
participation and philanthropy. Philanthropy, that's
Here's
the
a
word
pig.
should have come to me. And so we have this grid. We have, I'm a block from a rapid station, and so I see the trains going by all the time, and it's easy for me to get on and to walk to it and ride it. that is an exceptional thing in
Yeah.
most towns in America. And in the last city where I lived, they had built-in public transportation that they'd ripped up the streetcars 80 years before. So it's so many generations behind where people realized that, when it was built, it wasn't really a shock. Of course, we're going to have some way that we move people around the city,
Right.
but we've moved so many more generations down in the direction of car culture that it's harder to see. So, and that question of Nashville, how do you begin to build a grid 100 years past Cleveland when you would have built that? I guess one of my first questions, having the perspective of being in cities where you either have transit if you want it, or you have to have it. In New York City, you have to have it.
Yeah.
So many of our towns and cities, and I think this is true of a lot of our suburbs around Cleveland, where people don't have that exposure, don't feel that need, and so they don't quite see it. So I think my first question would be for those who either live on the outskirts of Cleveland or for whatever reason have had no reason to use public transportation, what don't they know about transit? What is what things might they be missing?
Excuse me. So great question. So what do they not know about it? Probably a lot. And it's not necessarily the person, the onus specifically on them.
Right.
I think it's the onus on RTA to be able to expose the public to what we do. So it's funny, I was having that same conversation, and a little bit of a different question, but that same grit of it the other day. And I was telling someone all of the things, all the programs that we have going on that are not just moving people. And they were amazed, so I'll go into a little bit of it, that we actually do so much on the social services side.
Okay.
And I don't think that that's necessarily expected of transit, which I think is mistake number one, right?
Okay.
Because my biggest pet peeve is that transportation, I'm talking about as an industry, is not at the table immediately in the front end. So I'm talking about economic development for the city. I'm talking about when people are thinking about what Public Square looks like, what the downtown area looks like, what East Cleveland looks like, all of these different neighborhoods. Public transit typically is layered on in the very tail end of the conversation. And then the question is, hey, we need a bus. Can you go ahead and fit it? And I've actually been in rooms where we literally could not fit the vehicle because there wasn't enough turning radius because the street wasn't built for the width of a bus, right? So that tells you right away that we're not necessarily, we're an afterthought, typically, and I'm talking about historically. But we're in a good space, I think, economically. We're in a good space politically. We've got a lot of change going on, where there's a lot of energy that may not have been over the last 30 years because folks are just kind of, as a newcomer to Cleveland, I see folks want to be known for more than just what we used to be in the Rockefeller era. But the question is, how do you get there? So, roundabout way to answer your question. For example, we have a lot of programs that we are putting out now have a social component to it. And by that, I mean like a social responsibility. So we have a Baby on Board project, for example. That's the name of it, Baby on Board. And that is a convener to make sure that public transit fare media, so our bus passes, rail passes, all of that, get to expecting mothers who have to get to well baby visits and maybe cannot. And so we find that transportation and mobility is a huge impediment to people being able to get to doctors and able to get health care. So a lot of people just say, hey, I don't have time. I can't afford to be able to take 2 and 3 vehicles or buses to be able to get to my appointment, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip this appointment. And then you turn around, you haven't been to the dentist in 3 years, or you haven't been to the doctor in 10 years, and then you're not sure exactly if you got that shot you should have, or you're not sure if you've gotten that checkup that you needed or that potential surgery. It's a lot of things like that. So we actually have partnered with the county and gotten funding for a few years to be able to increase that accessibility. So that's out there. We have the Transit Ambassador Program that you might have seen in the news over the last few days, and that's a kind of wellness component in addition to safety. So when you walk down the street, you might see an ambassador through Destination Cleveland, kind of washing the sidewalks and kind of helping you out. Well, why can't transit have that kind of ambassador to help you around? Because not everybody takes transit every day. So it could be someone who's lost or needs some help. It could be someone who's having an argument on the vehicle with someone else, but isn't necessarily needing a police intervention, but just someone to help diffuse the situation. A lot of these folks that we brought on were previous corrections officers. Some of them were previous mental health workers, social workers. We actually have 2 of those positions that are crisis intervention specialists, if I'm saying the word correctly. And they are social workers who work for RTA, essentially. And they report into our transit police. We've got 100 officers thereabouts that are operating in our system. We've got a K-9 unit. We've got all of those. We work with...
You have a K-9 unit?
We do.
No kidding.
You like dogs?
I do, yeah.
We have K-9. We have Touch a Truck, which is something we can go out with any major event, and we provide IDs for kids. Kind of like driver's licenses for those that are under 18, and it, helps avert the whole Amber Alert situation, right? We go out and we also distribute Narcan to those individuals who need it. Drug use is something that is in our communities, right? So we have to make sure that we can also help those individuals. I can't tell you how many times a month we actually do that and save lives. There's a lot of different programs. We see something, say something, if you hear that all the time. And there's young women and men who might be the victims of potential sex trafficking. We've averted a lot of those situations, and we have a whole program to be able to work through that. So we do a lot of things that I don't think people always realize, but it's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, but I want to ask a little bit more about the ambassadors, but what you just pointed, but before that, all of the things you just talked about tell a very different story than bus schedules, as important as those are. It's a realization that there, between the stations that you operate, between the trains and the buses, and even the easements, it is a significant place of where you receive and you encounter those who, within the social fabric, are in need in some way or another. You seem to, transit in this case is a place where people go, where they don't have anywhere else to go, but also is the means, the missing piece to access in so many ways, and not just getting people from point A to point B. It's realizing that there can be profound need in each and every one of those encounters that can range from someone like me trying to figure out how to work a CTA machine while I'm on vacation.
Don't let me forget about the easy fare. I'll bring that up too.
Oh, please do. Can range from that to someone whose life depends on the ability to get assistance that isn't necessarily going to be something with law enforcement that escalates, but perhaps even more importantly, be able to distribute Narcan in a moment. So we don't think of RTA and transit as social work, for lack of a better word. But in many ways, and to some extent, we experience people can walk into the cathedral and we want to care for them in the same way. There's a sense that you are a space that is open to the world, and it's a part of your mission, not just to get people from point A to point B, but to care for the whole person and the whole community.
So you are absolutely, I appreciate you because you're helping me get through this conversation and not forget anything.
Okay, good.
So you mentioned mission. That's absolutely important. We actually changed our mission statement. I want to say going on 12 months ago, maybe around 10 or so. With the pandemic, it's a little hard. Time is in a vacuum.
We know it.
But we changed our mission statement. I mean, it was a little painful, right? It was a spirited conversation about what do we want to present to the community and what do we want to present to ourselves.
Right.
So we sat in a room for weeks, going back and forth, or virtually, talking about, what we could change it to. And we were very tactile. We had a good mission statement before that I inherited, but it was very typical of transportation.
Right.
It was very tactical. It was safe, clean, on time, friendly. I mean, you probably hear that in any of the agencies you've been to. And the funny part about it is no one can recite it because it's so similar is that you kind of start interchanging words and you wonder what they really mean and all of that. So we changed it to connecting the community. Super simple. That's what it is. 3 words, connecting the community. And with that, it was the realization that we're more than just public transit, buses and trains. We do so much more, to your point, and so we wanted to start to embrace that. And our vision statement actually gets into a little bit more lengthy, but the crux of it is that we want to provide mobility solutions and be creative and innovative in that approach. And we also want to lead that conversation. Right. So we're doing those things, and it's not just lip service, and it's not just creating the programs and then being silent. I think you've got to be able to toot your own horn a little bit so that people know what's going on, and then let them do the work. If it's good, bad, or indifferent, we've got to get that too.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love that, connecting the community. And it changes not only how we see RTA, it changes how we see ourselves and how we see our relationship to our neighbor across the street, our neighbors across town, and how we grow together. Yeah. You've used a couple different words, mobility and access. Are those quite the same thing?
No, so that's a good question. So I think the conversation is going from transportation to mobility, right? It's kind of evolving that way because they're not the same, I don't believe.
How are they not the same?
So, good question. So I think...
I'm going to have a glass of water with that, thank you.
How did I know you were going to ask me that? But in all seriousness, have you ever seen the photo with the 3 little kids that are looking over into the baseball field? And one is, I think one is standing up. They're all different heights. And so the smallest one, it's like the chain link fence, right? And they have one where it's basically, equality versus, not accessibility, but being able to actually talk about what's equitable and on the appearance and what really is. And so they can see through this chain link fence, and you think, okay, they can all see the same thing. But then there's a bar in somebody's way, and there's this in somebody's way. The true place of equity is having them all in the same space, but the smallest one is actually on a box so that he's the same height as the other kids, so they have the same viewpoint, the same vantage point. So what we're trying to do is actually to create that so everyone can actually access the transit that we have available. So a good example of that would be the Easy Fare program, right? And I hate that I sound like a little bit of a salesperson, but I want to explain it and why we're trying to reimagine the programs that we already had and make them better. It's not just a way to spend money, right? I think the best CEOs are sometimes a little cheap, but we've also got to be able to know when to open the wallet. So I'll give an example. You mentioned the Ventra card. That's the card you showed me.
I'll demonstrate it once again.
Thank you so much. You're my Vanna. So that program actually rolled out when I was in Chicago, and I was in bus instruction at the time. And I was overall bus instruction for all the operators in the system. And CTA or Chicago Transit Authority has, at that time, was about 12,000 people working there in CTA. We have about 2,000 plus working here, so you can see the difference in scale. Now, the one garage that I was in specifically was Chicago Garage, and that probably was the size of our system, right? And being able to roll that program out was huge, because it took education and people had to understand how to switch to go online from cash and the whole thing. And that's kind of what we're launching into doing here. So with the Easy Fare program that we had rolled out in the end of June and July, creates a platform that gets into accessibility. Not just, hey, this is our product and we hope you can afford it. If you can't, oh well, we tried, right? We want to get away from that. So we have to be able to retain some form of cash because you have unbanked or folks that don't necessarily have credit cards and access to bank accounts in the population, or folks that get paid where they may not be able to afford a monthly pass, which is normally around $90-some every month. And they end up buying single fare, single ride tickets because that's what they can afford at the moment. So you can do $250 here, but you can't do 90, right? You may not even be able to do 20 or 30, but you can do $1 or $5. So you could even do an all-day pass. We've also reduced that cost a little bit. But with the Easy Fare, in the ideal situation, it creates a platform where if you need to hop on a Lake Tran bus, an RTA bus, potentially in the future ride a scooter or get in a ride share or whatever you got to do, you can all link it through one account, and then you can start to get discounts. And that's what's called fare capping. That's our next step. So we had to be able to create the platform electronically. It can be a little scary because it's the digital thing,
Right.
but that's the first step into being able to open up ourselves to that world of being able to pay and tap and go. So you got the folks that are, you know, a little bit more savvy, that maybe have a little bit more in the bank account, and it's fun for them, right? And it's sexy for them, excuse my language, right? But you, but you can actually...
Can I use that in sermons now?
I don't know. I apologize, but it's fun. It's something that they can actually enjoy, and it competes with what else is on the market. Now, on the other hand, if we are able to get, when we will be, to fair capping, that person who normally pays $250 every day or 3 and 4 times a day will be able to hit a limit. And let's just say that limit is the equivalent of buying a $90 or $90 monthly pass. When they hit that limit, and let's say they hit that limit in week 3 of the month,
right,
everything becomes free until the next month starts. So in that way, that's your equality. That's your true access, where that person is not being penalized because they make less money or they budget differently or whatever the case is. They can actually spend the same amount of money as the person that makes, you know, $500,000 as a doctor at Cleveland Clinic.
right.
They're not going to be penalized because right now that person is being penalized for being in different circumstances economically that may or may not be out of their control, and they're actually paying more into the system than someone who just rides the system to go to a Guardians game, you know, once a season.
Right.
So that's, I know that was really long-winded, but that's
that's
the changes that we're trying to make.
So that's something that exists now or is in process?
It will. It's in process. So it's halfway there. The Easy Fair app is here. That's a real thing.
Right.
You can, like you pulled out your venture card.
Okay.
You can show me your phone and dial. You'll do that next time, I'm sure.
I actually can.
There you go. And you'll pull the Easy Fair app.
I've got RTA downloaded. Hang on.
And you'll pull the Easy Fair app. So ideally, if I am afforded the opportunity to come back and talk to you in a year or so, we should be able to have that fair capping in place.
Great.
Yeah.
From a plan, you mentioned that you began as a planner.
I did.
And that, so much of transit is at the heart of that in many ways. And I will admit that one of my places where I am a nerd is I like listening to blogs and podcasts about how we're kind of moving beyond cars, how we're rediscovering some of these whether it's trains, whether it's being 15-minute cities, creating more walkable environments.
Yeah.
It is tough to do. And I also realize that there's a lot of privilege in that. I mean, I think we look at some of the developments that become darlings, and you say, well, if you put this new condo complex in Little Italy, and the impact of the transit station around that is significant. Well, we also know what the rents are in some of those places too.
Yeah.
You know, how much of those, the kind of snazzy and on a more negative side, gentrifying areas, is the focus of transit planning versus this really important equity stuff that is, how are we actually caring for the people who already live here, who already have homes? How do we make this a good place for them to be living?
So I think what you're describing in the language that I hear every day in transit is TOD, or transit-oriented development.
Right.
And that's something that RTA specifically, I think, can have a heavy hand in, that we maybe haven't been so active in before. We do a lot for the communities by way of being there. So if we have a station that's in good repair and it looks safe and it's well lit and you can feel comfortable there, that's great. However, to your point, if you're gentrifying a neighborhood or if you're developing a neighborhood and getting to mixed use and all of that, transit can play a huge role in that, as I hear a bus, being able to set the stage for the requirement for the developer to have a mixed use purpose for that development. So not everybody will make over $100,000 who lives there. Not everyone will have the biggest unit in the lot. There has to be some sort of math behind the developer requirement. so that transit-oriented development, the sheer fact that we have a train station there or a bus stop there requires them to be able to subsidize some of the rents.
Okay.
And requires them to be able to enter into the development agreement with the idea that it will be for mixed use. And it has to be accessible economically for different folks, not just the higher ups. That's something, we actually own a lot of property in RTA as well. And when I say that, I mean just random pieces of inherited property through the decades that is probably well sought after, but is not on the market because we haven't endeavored into those conversations yet. So we actually are doing a lot of that. The Metro Health campus is a big deal. The West 25th is a good example of a TOD project where we are starting to be a player in that revitalization of the neighborhood, because it's not just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's such a huge responsibility, I think, for transit. I'm just talking about the whole industry, to be able to understand the role that they can play in creating community and creating space, because we see people from all walks of life. It's not that we see one particular kind of customer. And if we're successful, everyone should be using public transit, right? It should be everyone from the kid who just got into high school all the way up to the elderly retiree who is still active and mobile and wants to get out on their own and maybe using paratransit just because of mobility issues. So it spans the gamut. And I think being able to understand the responsibility we have is super important. I come from a long line of teachers and educators, and so whenever you have a question, the answer is always look it up or, talk to somebody. So I think to be able to explain that is going to be really important. We have to be better educators in transit so people understand how it can be utilized to build up the community and not be afraid of it. Because it is a place, just as this one I would imagine, where people come to us for shelter. They come to us for help. A lot of folks, and this is all ages, all, ranges of education and race and everything else, a lot of people come to us because they know they can get help. And so not every time, but sometimes when you do see those incidents happen on a bus or a train, they're happening in large part because that activity will likely stop. It will not likely end in death. Every now and then you end up with a fatal situation where the circumstances are out of control, which could happen anywhere. But 9 times out of 10, the response that we can control, we don't have to wait, and the city does a great job, but we don't have to wait on them all the time. We have our own transit police force, we have our own supervisors, we have cameras everywhere. The average vehicle has anywhere from 7 to 11 video cameras on it, and people sometimes don't realize that. We have our own control command center. There's a lot of things that we are able to work quickly and respond faster. So, good, bad, or indifferent, we inherit a lot of the societal outputs because folks know that they have a better chance of survival if they're on RTA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, with our last 5 minutes, I want to invite people to come forward. I think we need you to come forward to the mic, or Scott will bring the mic to you.
Hi. First I want to say that I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
I've been a bus rider in Cleveland for my whole life, and I know what you inherited. But I have 2 questions for you. The first one is a specific question. Why is there no longer a bus that goes into University Circle?
Okay, you want to go with the second one too, or just go ahead?
Answer that one first for me, please.
So the question is, why is there not a bus that goes into University Circle?
Yes.
Got it. So that one we had and I'm assuming this is a byproduct of the Next Gen redesign.
Yes.
Okay. So for the Next Gen, with that specifically, I'd have to look at the detail because I don't want to give you the wrong answer. But a lot of that, we halted the Next Gen about halfway into the pandemic and also had to recalculate because of the changes that everything was happening with people working from home. And so we actually were planning to come out with the end product of the next gen redesign 6 to 8 months before we actually did. And so we also were in the middle of getting funding and seeing what was going on and how we retain everybody without laying anybody off. And we didn't do that. I'm proud of that. But I wouldn't say we got it perfect, but we had to tweak it because we weren't seeing the same patterns of ridership. And some of the routes that we had couldn't sustain us paying for the vehicle to go down the same streets because we didn't get the ridership we used to. A lot of folks weren't going to the same grocery stores. A lot of folks weren't going to the same jobs. Some of them weren't going at all. And we had to change the way that we patterned our routes to be able to survive through the pandemic. We never went below 85% of regular service. And I think even then, we only did that for a few weeks. We stayed at 93%. So to answer your question, we had to change it because we weren't seeing the same patterns of ridership, but that's not to say it couldn't come back. What we're doing is we're reviewing constantly to see if we need to add back service as people come back online. But a lot of it is we can't run the empty buses, and some of that showed that that's what that was producing. More than likely, and I'm not sure of the exact route you're talking about, but there should be, if it was done correctly, there should be a walkable line within a couple miles. If not, then that's something we need to look at, and I can get your information.
I'm mobility impaired, and it's not walkable.
Okay.
The second question is, you mentioned the fact that public transit is not included at the table when urban planning is done. Do you have plans or ideas for basically pushing yourself into it?
Absolutely. Yes. So I like to talk if you hadn't seen that, and I'm comfortable doing it.
I've just been in a program with India for the last year. She's very comfortable doing it.
I'm sorry.
No, it's a compliment. It's what you need to do.
We were in Leadership Cleveland together, so he had to endure me for 10 months or something like that.
Likewise.
But I will say that, yes, so my plan is, and it has been, and we're seeing the effects of it now, where we have developers that are not going, by and large, are not going forward without asking RTA their opinion, and also including RTA in the drafting plans before the blueprint is finalized. So if you hear about all of this, like I said, like the public square and the downtown and the Huff neighborhoods and the Dream 66, all these different plans that are being put out there, RTA, I dare I say finally, because I know we've been in those rooms, but if we've been silent, it doesn't count to me. We've also got to make sure that we sit on boards and councils. So we've asked the city, when Mayor Bibb came online, and he had a lot of different, I call it like a Shark Tank, and he had folks that could come up with their best suggestions. We've actually asked or proposed that there be a zoning guideline, and they also be a guidebook for development that happens in the city and around the city, and that transit be a required consultation with any development that happens within the city. So we're now starting to get those calls in advance. And it's funny because the other week, my response was, we need to know what the final plan is so we can create the mobility solution to fix it. So we're now at the table in a lot more spaces that I just don't think we were in before. For me, it's not enough to go to the award banquet. I actually want to be in the developer table. Yeah.
One more question from Gail. Gail, we have a microphone coming to you.
I have noticed that the buses, their emissions are much cleaner. And my question is RTA working toward more electric vehicles to keep our environment, a little more safe?
So good question about the emissions. So thank you for noticing that. We actually have a mixed fleet. So we have the traditional diesel and hybrid, and that's where you sometimes see the smoke and that kind of thing. We have CNG, which is compressed natural gas, and more than half of our fleet is CNG. And so we're constantly including that in our bus buying. And every time we do that, we have to make sure that our fueling station also is CNG. So you kind of have to buy them together. So we're moving toward a higher percentage of our fleet being CNG, which you're going to see less of that diesel emission and that fuel. Now, regarding the electric vehicle, we actually went out for a grant. We did not get 100% of what we asked for. The typical cost of a vehicle that's electric is about $800,000 a vehicle, almost $1 million, depending on what you go for, bells and whistles and everything. The diesel is about half that price, maybe 3/4. Our strategic plan is to be able to have electric vehicles online within the next 10 years. Our plan is to be able to pilot at least, don't hold me to it, but I believe somewhere around 6 to 10 electric vehicles within the next 3 to 4 years. And so we'll have to be able to self-fund a lot of that. We're going to go back out for funding to be able to kind of circumvent that, to help us pay for it at least by 50% within the next year or two. So I would imagine we're in 2022. By 2026, you should probably be able to see a few of those electric vehicles out. I've had experience running those in Tennessee. The interesting thing about those vehicles, that they're still working through the technology, is that they run out of battery life, just like you would with your own vehicle. So you have to be able to create and build the charging station along with the bus. The cost 5 years ago was roughly $600,000 a piece for each charging station, with the vehicle being about $700,000 to $800,000. So with inflation, you probably have upped that a few hundred. But the short of it is, yes, it's in our strategic plan, and we intend to be able to pilot those within the next couple years. We just have to be able to figure out the funding. Yeah.
And with an electric bus,
yes,
it won't interrupt the sermon as much when it drives past us.
That's so funny. The one comment I had, or complaint I had in Nashville with the electric vehicle, and those were the older version, was that it was too quiet.
Oh, I've heard of that.
And people were afraid that they would get hit when they walked across the street. And so we ended up having to put a little like bird tweet, 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 what I mean, almost, so that you could hear it. Almost like a bell when you were crossing. In Nashville, I mean, if you've been there, it's hard to hear sometimes anyway with all the music.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But when you come to Trinity, people come here because they want to be in the middle of the city. Mm-hmm. And I think hearing, and we'll conclude here, to be able to hear the buses go by, you really helped us to see that between the people who are on that bus, the people who operate it, it's a window into our whole city, to people, not only how they're getting around, but also how we're caring for those, how we're talking about equity and access, and also how we're talking about economic development. So you've really helped to open up that window, and we're so grateful that you could be with us. Thank you for coming.
I appreciate being here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And to those of you here in person, all of you who are joining us online, whichever camera you're behind, I can never remember. I'll look at this one. Thank you for joining us for the Trinity Forum. We thank India Birdsong for spending her time with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. All right.